The title of today's Sunday school lesson is Abigail Saves the Day. Abigail Saves the Day. And I'm getting some funny looks already. Abigail Saves the Day. And people are thinking, what? What are you talking about? Who's Abigail? Who's Abigail? Well, we'll talk about that. All right? 1 Samuel chapter 25 is where we're going to be today. 1 Samuel chapter 25. We have a lot of reading. We're going to, for the most part, read the whole chapter. And 1 Samuel chapter 25 has like 44 verses. So we're going to be reading quite a bit today. Obviously, in my title, I told you who the hero of this story is. So you shouldn't be surprised when we get there. But maybe you're not familiar with this story. And so we're going to cover 1 Samuel chapter 25. It starts off pretty sad. It starts off with a statement, and Samuel died. Now Samuel, of course, you remember the story of Samuel, right? Pretty neat. But he was influential in the story of Israel getting a king, and Brother Philip has been going through some of that in some of his lessons a little bit. He touched on some of that, right, where he anointed Saul. Well, Samuel is also the guy that anointed David and told David that he would be king. And of course we see that the relationship between Saul and David deteriorated, but Samuel was the man of God. Samuel was the guy that people went to when they needed to know what the will of the Lord was. Well, Samuel has died, and it says in the rest of this verse, and all the Israelites were gathered together and lamented him and buried him in his house at Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. And there was a man in Maon whose possessions were in Carmel. And the man was very great, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail, and she was a woman of good understanding and of a beautiful countenance. And the man was churlish and evil in his doings, and he was of the house of Caleb. Now, let's set the stage here a little bit, right? So there's this man from Carmel. His name is Nabal. He is a very rich man, apparently. It says that he has 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. Now, we don't think a whole lot about having sheep and goats, but in this day and age and in this place, having 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats was a big deal. And he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now, you guys know what shearing a sheep is, right? They get all that wool on them, and you shear the sheep, right? And that can then be taken and used for different things. But it's actually a time of, it would be really a time of great celebration, because as you've made it through the season and your sheep, which are your livelihood and the way you make money, you didn't lose them. They weren't lost. They weren't stolen. They weren't destroyed by wild animals. And whenever you get down to this end and you're able to shear your sheep and you're able to kind of have that harvest, so to speak, right? It becomes a great time of celebration, and you're going to, we'll see here in a little bit that he's going to put on a big party over the fact that, right, he's been able to make it through the season, and now he's kind of had his harvest, so to speak. But Nabal, his wife, was a lady by the name of Abigail, and what it tells us is that she was a woman of good understanding. Now you look up that phrase, and really it means that she was a pretty brilliant woman. She was smart. She was a very smart woman, but she also had a beautiful countenance. Not only was she a beautiful woman, but she was a very brilliant and smart woman, and a very wise woman. But her husband, it says that he was churlish and evil in his doings. Now, this was not a really, this is not a nice guy. That word there that we don't really use means severe or cruel, hard. So he was a kind of guy that, you've ever been around those people where you just don't even like to be around them, and you definitely don't want to talk to them, right? Because when you talk to them, they're just harsh and cruel, and the things they say are mean, and they're just blunt and harsh. That's the kind of guy that he was. And it says that he was evil in his doings. He was not he was not a nice guy. No, not only, like, there are some people that are just gruff, right? And when I say gruff, like, they seem like they're hard, but as you get to know them, they're really inside. They're kind of just big teddy bears, but they just kind of seem gruff. That's not this guy. This guy is mean and cruel and harsh and dishonest, and he's just not a nice guy. Now, I don't know about you, but are you beginning to feel sorry for Abigail a little bit? Right? He's just not a nice guy. But that's who she's married to. Now, interestingly enough, it says he's of the house of Caleb. Now, I don't know this for sure, but as I've studied it, I've looked at it, and we can't really know, but the indication would be is that he actually comes from a good heritage. Caleb, of course, was, when you think about Caleb, right, he's one of those guys that stood for the Lord and fought for the Lord, and he was a good, godly man. He was one of the ones that had went in and said, no, we can take this land, right? But his heritage, that's where he came from, but he himself was not a good man. Now, verse 4, and David heard in the wilderness that Nabal did shear his sheep. And David sent out 10 young men, and David said unto the young men, get you up to Carmel, and go to Nabal, and greet him in my name, and thus shall ye say to him that liveth in prosperity, peace be both to thee, and peace be to thine house, and peace be unto all that thou hast. And now I have heard that thou hast shearers. Now thy shepherds which were with us, we hurt them not, neither was there aught missing unto them all the while they were in Carmel. Ask thy young men, and they will show thee. Wherefore let the young men find favor in thine eyes, for we come in a good day. Give, I pray thee, whatsoever cometh to thine hand unto thy servants and to thy son David. Now, this is a little bit interesting here. David has heard that Nabal is going through and he's shearing his sheep. And David says he takes these 10 young men that are in his group, and he tells them to go talk to Nabal. And he says, when he says go in my name, what he's saying is, when you get there, tell them that we were sent by David, the son of Jesse, and that in the name of David, we hear that you are shearing your sheep. It's a great day. It's been a prosperous year. The Lord has blessed you. And when your shepherds were out in the wilderness, we were there. Not only did we not harm them, not only did we not take from them, but we helped protect them. So, in other words, Nabal, part of the fact that you're able to have such a good harvest this year, the fact that you're able to have such prosperity this year, is partly due to the fact that me and my men helped protect your shepherds and your sheep while they were in the wilderness. Because of that, and because this is such a good year for you, our request is that out of the goodness of your heart, would you reward these 10 young men for the work that we did helping you and your shepherds? That's kind of the idea there. David is saying, hey, you're taking care of your shepherds, you're taking care of your shearers, you're going to go throw a great feast to celebrate and to reward them for the work done. Don't forget us. Don't forget that we were there protecting your stuff. Can we take part? Can you help give us some meat and some bread and some drink that we might have a reward as well? Is kind of the idea here. And David said, if you may not know what all happened, but just ask your shepherds, ask your young men. They'll tell you what we did to help them. And so that's kind of what David sent them as messengers to do. And then it says in verse 9, And when David's young men came, they spake to Nabal according to all those words in the name of David, and ceased. They came in, they found Nabal, they said, hey, we're here on behalf of David, and here are the things that David said that we should tell you. Here's the things that David said we should ask you. And they stopped and they waited for Nabal to respond. In verse 10, and Nabal answered David's servants and said, who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? There be many servants nowadays that break away every man from his master. Now, I personally, when I read this, I don't think that Nabal was, that he didn't know who David was. He's being sarcastic. He's saying, who's David? He's a nobody. Who's the son of Jesse? He's nobody. There's lots of people that break away from their master nowadays. Now, what's he referring to there? Well, if you remember at this time, David is actually fleeing from Saul. David was Saul's servant, right? He had fought for Saul. He had been with Saul. He had played music for Saul. Now Saul is out to kill him, and David is broken away and has his followers. And he's saying, who are you? You're just David. You're a son of Saul. You're a son of Jesse. I mean, like, lots of people break away from their masters nowadays. In verse 11, shall I then take my bread and my water and my flesh that I have killed from my shears and give it unto men whom I know not whence they be? He said, I don't care about David. I don't care who you guys are. I don't care that you were out there helping my shepherd. I don't even know you guys. Why would I take of my possession and my prosperity and give it to you? Go away. Verse 12, so David's young men turned their way and went again and came and told him all those sayings. And David said unto his men, gird ye on every man his sword. And they girded on every man his sword. And David also girded on his sword. And there went up after David about 400 men, and 200 abode by the stuff. But one of the young men, well, let's just stop there before we get to the next verse. Now, David's reaction, listen, Nabal is rude and he's harsh and he's not a nice man, and he mocks David's young men. He shows no respect to David, and he refuses to give them anything, and he sends them back to David. And when David hears it, David gets so angry, he tells his men to put on their swords, and they get their swords on, and they get on horses or whatever they've got, and man, they're heading to Nabal's. Now, what do you think they intend on doing with their swords? You're going to find out here in a minute. But David takes 400 men with him. David is angry. I mean, he's very angry. Matter of fact, I'm going to skip a couple verses. I'm going to read a little bit to you. David he's really at this point, he's out to get blood is what it amounts to. Verse 21, listen to this. Now David had said, surely in vain have I kept all that this fellow hath in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that pertained unto him, and he hath requited me evil for good. So and more also do God unto the enemies of David, if I leave all that pertaineth to him by the morning light, any that pisseth against the wall. He has basically just said, me and my 400 men, we are going to Nabal's and we are going to destroy him. Not only him, but anybody that is associated with Nabal. He is going to kill them, all of them. Not just Nabal, but he literally has the intentions of wiping out Nabal and all of his house and all of his servants and all of his stuff. I'd say David's pretty angry. Don't you think? But back up to verse 14. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, Behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to salute our master, and he railed on them. That idea of railed on them is to berate them and to mock them and to, again, treat them poorly. But the men were very good unto us, and we were not hurt, neither missed we anything as long as we were conversant with them when we were in the fields. They were a wall unto us both by night and day, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. So the shepherds come to, Nabal didn't even bother to ask, right? David said, ask your young men. They didn't even bother to ask. But the young men went to Abigail and said, listen, David's men were right. When we were out there in the wilderness, they didn't harm us, but not only did they not harm us, their men became a wall around us to protect us both day and night. So in other words, he's saying what David said is true. We wouldn't have what we have if it wasn't for David and his men. Verse 17, Now therefore know and consider what thou wilt do. He brings it to Abigail and says, listen, Nabal, your husband, he treated him poorly. But listen, David's men were right. They treated us good. They protected us. We wouldn't have what we have. What are you going to do about it, Abigail? It's interesting, he didn't go to Nabal, or at least we're not recorded that he went to Nabal. But listen to this. He says, For evil is determined against our master and against all his household, for he is such a son of Belial that a man cannot speak to him. This goes to show you again just what kind of guy Nabal was. This young man says, nobody can reason with him. He's such an evil, vile man, nobody can talk to him. But because of the way he's treated David and his men, listen, we know enough about David. David is coming to get him. And we're all in danger. Verse 18. Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 bottles of wine and 5 sheep ready dressed. By the way, if you don't know, when a sheep is dressed, it doesn't mean that it put a little pair of pants on it and a coat on it, right? It means that they skinned it and that they cooked it and it's ready to eat. And 5 measures of parched corn and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on asses. Now Abigail, listen, she didn't waste any time. When she heard what had happened, she heard that what David's men had said was true, she acted right then. She took 200 loaves, she took 2 bottles of wine, 5 sheep, so meat, parched corn, clusters of raisins. She gathered enough stuff to throw a feast. She laid them on her donkeys, and then it says in verse 19, And she said unto her servants, Go on before me, behold, I come after you. But she told not her husband Nabal. She sent some servants to say, Go ahead of me, go get David, tell him I'm coming. And as it was so, she rode on the ass, that she came down by the covert of the hill, and behold, David and his men came down against her, and she met them. Excuse me. In verse 21 is where we picked up where David had surely said that we did all this in vain, and right, we're going to go destroy them. Verse 22, he talked about that how he wasn't going to leave anybody left. Verse 23, And when Abigail saw David, she hastened and lighted off the ass and fell down before David on her face and bowed herself to the ground, and fell at his feet, and said, Upon me, my Lord, upon me let this iniquity be, and let thine handmaid, I pray thee, speak in thine audience, and hear the words of thine handmaid. She gathered all this stuff up. She sent people ahead. She came along. As soon as she saw David, she ran up to David. She fell on her face before David in a very humble and meek way, saying, Listen, there's been a transgression. There's been iniquity. Let the guilt of that fall on me. And please let me explain. Let me have an audience with you. She's pleading with him to be heard. Now listen, she doesn't pull any punches either. Because in verse 25, she says, Let not my Lord, I pray thee, regarding this man of Belial. Who's she talking about when she says this man of Belial? By the way, the word Belial is the idea of without profit, worthless, destructive. It's often used when dealing with wicked people. She actually says to David, Let my Lord, I pray thee, regard this man Belial, even Nabal. Who's she talking about? She's talking about her own husband. For as his name, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. He's an idiot. He's a troublemaker. His name itself, it's like she says, like, this is him. This is who he is. That's what he is. It means a fool. His name basically means a fool. And she's saying that's what he is. Now, it's an interesting approach. What a sad situation that this lady, like, she's married to this guy who's rude and harsh and cruel, and as she talks to him, as she talks about him to David, she just has to be honest and say, he's a fool. But she's throwing herself really at David's mercy. She says in the last half of verse 25, But I, thine handmaid, saw not the young men of my Lord, whom thou didst send. She says, listen, you sent messengers, and Nabal was a fool, and he did not listen to you. I did not hear your original message. But as soon as I did, I came. Verse 26, Now therefore, my Lord, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, seeing the Lord hath withholden thee from coming to shed blood, and from avenging thyself with thine own hand, now let thine enemies, and they that seek evil to my Lord, be as Nabal. And now this blessing which thine handmaid hath brought unto my Lord, let it even be given unto the young men that follow my Lord. I pray thee, forgive the trespass of thine handmaid, for the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord fighteth the battles of the Lord, and evil hath not been found in thee all thy days. Yet a man is risen to pursue thee and to seek thy soul, but the soul of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of life with the Lord thy God, and the souls of thine enemies, them shall he sling out as out of the middle of a sling. And it shall come to pass, when the Lord shall have done to my Lord according to all the good that he hath spoken concerning thee, and shall have appointed thee ruler over Israel, that this shall be no grief unto thee, nor offense of heart unto my Lord, either that thou hast shed blood causeless, or that my Lord hath avenged himself. But when the Lord shall have dealt well with my Lord, then remember thine handmaid. Now there's a lot that I just read. But she basically throws herself at David's feet. She's pleading her cause. She's saying, my husband's a fool. I had not heard this, but now that I did, here's these gifts that I have brought to you. And she actually acknowledges that as much as she knows about David is that Jehovah, right? The word Lord is used a lot in this chapter. Sometimes it's lowercase, sometimes it's uppercase. When she refers to David as Lord, she's just referring to him as master. but the word Lord, all caps, is Jehovah. That's talking about God. She basically says, I know that God is with you. Listen, the story of David and the things that he had done and the victories he's had, they were known. And she says, listen, I know God is with you. And I know that Saul has risen up to pursue you. But I also believe that because God is with you, you will be delivered and your enemies will be overthrown. And you, in essence, will become king one day. And when you become king one day, there's a couple things. I don't want you to be at fault for shedding blood without cause. And I also don't want this offense that my fool husband has done to be something that causes you to seek vengeance. And when this is over, I don't want you to look poorly on me and on my people. One day you will be in a position of authority, and I don't want you to look back on this day and think poorly of us. And then she asks for forgiveness. Now, listen, she's wise enough to react immediately when she hears what happens. She's wise enough to know what to do about it. She also asks for mercy from David. She asks for forgiveness from David. And she also acknowledges that the Lord is with him. I want you to notice David's reaction. And David said to Abigail, Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, which sent thee this day to meet me. When David is provided deliverance from something, David is wise enough to know that God actually deserves the credit. When he's delivered from his enemies, he knows God deserves the credit. When he's delivered from his own anger, he knows God deserves the credit. And he recognizes that Abigail is in essence a messenger from God to stop him from what he was about to do. Verse 33, And blessed be thy advice, and blessed be thou, which has kept me this day from coming to shed blood and from avenging myself with mine own hand. David is basically saying, I am so thankful that God sent you to intervene. I am so thankful that you've given me this advice. And I am so thankful that I have been stopped from shedding blood. Now there's different opinions about this. Some people say that Nabal, if he knew that David was supposed to be king, it was like treason and he deserved death. The challenge with that is that David wasn't king yet. I actually believe that although Nabal was rude and harsh, and yes, he should have given to David, David was overreacting. David was about to go kill not only Nabal, but all of his servants and all of his wives and his kids and everything. He was out to destroy Nabal and everything Nabal had. Because he was angry that he was treated poorly. He was treated poorly. Did he deserve some of the things that Nabal had? Yes, he did, because he had helped protect Nabal's stuff. Did he deserve to be treated disrespectfully and to have his servants chased off? No. Was that enough justification to kill not only Nabal, who was the guilty one, but everybody associated with Nabal? No. And I think you see that in David's reaction, because he is so thankful that the Lord sent Abigail to intervene, and he's thankful for the advice that she gave, and that it kept him from shedding blood. And then verse 34, For in every deed, as the Lord God of Israel liveth, which hath kept me back from hurting thee, except thou hadst hastened and came to meet me, surely there had been not left unto Nabal by the morning light any that pisseth against the wall. So David received of her hand that which she had brought him, and said unto her, Go up in peace to thine house. See, I have hearkened to thy voice, and have accepted thy person. David listened to her, accepted the gift that she had brought, accepted the advice that she had given, and told her to go back in peace, and that she and her household would be left alone. In verse 36, And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he held a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. Listen, Nabal is clueless. All of this was going on. David was bringing 400 men with swords. He had chased off his servants, and he didn't know enough to know that David was going to retaliate. Abigail knew it immediately. He's just throwing a big feast, having a big party. Listen, he would have been totally unprepared when David had shown up. It tells us in the last half of verse 36, And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunken. Wherefore she told him nothing, less or more, until the morning light. And it came to pass in the morning that when wine was gone out of Nabal, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became as a stone. And it came to pass about 10 days after that the Lord smote Nabal, that he died. She comes home. He's got this big party going on. He's drunk. He's happy. He's partying. She doesn't tell him what happened. She lets him go to bed. He sleeps it off. When he wakes up in the morning and he's not drunk anymore, she tells him, David was coming with 400 men with swords, and he was going to destroy you. But I brought him this stuff, and I intervened. And Nabal says that he basically, the idea here is that he passed out. Now, he appears to have been in this comatose state for like 10 days and then he died. It's actually likely that he had a stroke or a heart attack, basically. Now, some people say that he was just worried, that he was upset that she had given away his stuff. I don't think so. I think basically when he realized that he had almost died and probably was even concerned about whether David would come back, he basically he had a heart attack or a stroke. The Lord struck him down with something, right? He was so terrified when he heard what had happened that he basically, like I said, had a heart attack or a stroke or something, and within 10 days had died. It goes on, the rest of the story. And when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, Blessed be the Lord that hath pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal. God judged Nabal. David didn't have to. God did. And kept his servant from evil. He kept David from evil. Not that Nabal didn't deserve destruction, but not all of Nabal's household. But that's what David was going to do. David is thankful that the Lord intervened, that God judged Nabal and kept David from guilt. For the Lord hath returned the wickedness of Nabal upon his own head, and David sent and communed with Abigail to take her to him to wife. And when the servants of David were come to Abigail to Carmel, they spake unto her, saying, David sent us unto thee to take thee to him to wife. And she arose and bowed herself in her face to the earth and said, Behold, let thine handmaid be a servant to wash the feet of thy servants, my lord. And Abigail hasted and arose and rode upon an ass with 5 damsels of hers that went after her. And she went after the messengers of David and came and became his wife. So you see there, in the end, Abigail actually ends up marrying David after Nabal is dead. It's pretty clear when you look at this chapter who the hero of this story is. Obviously, it's not her husband. Man, he was a fool and a jerk. It's not David. Listen, did Nabal deserve punishment? Yes. But man, David was out for blood. David was out to destroy Nabal and everything Nabal had and everybody that was with Nabal. But Abigail, upon hearing what happened, intervened, and Abigail saved the day. Listen, Nabal ended up dying at the judgment of God, but Abigail saved not only herself, but all of the shepherds and all of the servants and her handmaids and everybody, because David was out to destroy them all. And Abigail's actions saved that whole household. It also saved David. It's pretty clear when you read this that David himself recognized once she intervened that he was going too far with what he had planned. And repeatedly he talks about he's thankful that the Lord intervened. And so as you look at this story, it's pretty clear that Abigail here is the hero in this story. It's pretty neat when you look at it, because we hear a whole lot about David. There are chapters upon chapters upon chapters written about David. But this chapter gives us a little bit of an insight into this lady Abigail, and the heart that she had, and the wisdom that she had, and her desire to do what was right. It's just neat, because so many times we think about, I love character studies in the Bible, especially character studies of those people that we don't know that much about. Because listen, we think about people like Peter and Paul, and those people that, listen, they're in the Bible, and they're all over the place, right? And everybody knows them. But there's all these little snapshots in the Bible of these people that we don't know much else about their life, but the Bible tells us enough to know these were faithful people. And I think it's important for us to remember that. Listen, we may not ever be up on the big stage. We may not ever be in a situation where this whole world, this whole community, whatever, knows about us. But the day-to-day things that we do to be faithful to the Lord are so important. And listen, nobody else may know about us, but if the Lord is pleased with us, that's all that matters. And so it's just neat to think about stories like this. All right, we're going to go ahead and close there. We'll go ahead and be dismissed in a word of prayer, okay? Dear Heavenly Father,